Is the age of the stack, or in this case half stack, coming to an end, or is it already a bygone era? And if so, have we witnessed the death of something powerful in the history of rock and roll? Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett and welcome to the channel and welcome to this video. Today we're talking about half stacks. We're talking about the way that things have changed in the modern era, the way that things have gotten smaller, and we're taking a look at this specific amp which I got my hands on, which sort of spurred this whole video. This is a Marshall vintage modern head going into a 1960A slant cab. This is actually standard 1960A that previous owner just refinished in vintage styling, which I think looks awesome. Now I traded for this recently. This is not a sponsored video. I do love Marshall amps and things. But the person that I traded for, he had it for sale for a while, and so I made him an offer. And he accepted the offer, and we got together, and he said, I really didn't want to trade it. I didn't even want to sell it, but I never use it anymore because it's just too big, and there's no reason to bring it out. He said he brought it to a show recently, and even brought a backup with him, something to plug direct into the PA in case anything went wrong. Got there, and the show said, don't lug that thing in, just plug direct into the board. We don't even want you to bring that thing in here. So we got through the trade, and I'm on my way out, and he looked kind of sad. I said, you sure you want to do this? And he said, yeah, I'm totally sure, but it's also just the death of a dream. How much does that make a difference in practicality and sound? The thing is it's a Marshall stack. Yeah, I know it's a half stack, but just bear with me. I mean, the idea of a full stack nowadays is completely ridiculous unless you're a massive A-list touring band. And even in that case, many of them are using facades and using small amps mic'd up in the background. If you are using a big rig, from what I've seen, at least most big guitar players who are touring massive stages, they will use something more like a tone hinge. It's a number of different amplifiers, and could be a number of different amplifier heads and cabinets sort of arranged in a certain way. It's not really the line, like the fleet of stacks like you might be familiar with in rock history, like Clapton with Cream, or Jimi Hendrix, or Angus Young with AC/DC. It's all just changed. It's changed to go to a more practical sort of way. And of course, what has pushed this even further is the development of digital modelers and the fact that digital modelers sound so much better. But what is unique about half stacks and the speaker configuration in particular is there is a sound that they get in a certain way that it's hard to get in another way. And I've actually talked about this before. For instance, I've brought either my super reverb or my twin reverb to small gigs before. And it's not about needing the volume. It's certainly not about needing the volume, but it is about a dynamic of sound that you get from that amp that you don't get from a smaller amplifier. It's funny, I brought a super reverb to a smaller gig once, and even the band kind of went, a little bit of overkill there, don't you think, Jack? And I was like, no, trust me on this. It's going to sound great. And It sounded great. And the drummer actually came up after and said, he was like, I was wrong, man. I can't believe that sounded really good. I was like, yeah, the thing is that the super reverb with its 410s sounds bigger and wider and more dynamic than a smaller amp with a smaller speaker. And I'm not saying those are bad. I'm just saying it's different. And sometimes I want a bigger sound, not necessarily a louder sound. Well, the 412, I mean, that's about the biggest sound you can get unless you're going with a full stack. And what is amazing about it, and what really actually shocked me, because I have very little experience with half stacks, the thump, the bass, it's so powerful. It actually really, like, when I plugged it in, I kind of went, wow, this is different. I've only owned one half stack before. It was actually a Carvin. I want to say it was something like an X100. It was actually kind of a cool amp. I didn't hang on to it very long. This was like 15 or so years ago. And I lugged it out to one gig, and it was kind of immediately like, yeah, I'm not doing that again. That's ridiculous. Why would I bring that out when I can get just as good a sound out of a 212 combo? I still remember, though, the days when you couldn't go see a local gig without somebody out there with a JCM 2000 half stack or a Mesa dual rectifier half stack or so. That was the thing to have, even kind of back in the, early to mid 2000s. That was the thing. Part of it's because modeling wasn't as good, but part of it was the image. Part of it was the idea of what a rock band is. Things hadn't gotten smaller yet. Things were still big and loud, and maybe they were too loud sometimes. But it's not a volume thing. This actually sounds pretty good at lower volumes. I'm not playing at obscene volumes in this video, and you'll hear it still sounds pretty good. There are a couple of settings that maybe aren't as good as they would be if you cranked it harder, but they don't sound bad. Now, this amp in particular is really cool. This was an amp that was shorter lived than I think a lot of players wanted. This was kind of the idea of taking a vintage amplifier and giving it some modern appointments to bring it up to the new era. But I think it was misunderstood, and I think the biggest thing that was misunderstood about it was the fact that it really wasn't a channel switching amp. It had a couple of cool features to boost the mids and to boost kind of the drive and the dynamics of it and everything, but it really was not intended as a two-channel amplifier. And I think a lot of players who were looking at this amp really wanted a vintage style JCM 2000. The JCM 2000 DSL was an awesome amp. It was used by loads of famous players for some amazing tones, including Gary Moore and Jeff Beck, among others. But it was a very modern kind of Marshall amp. The clean was amazing, but the drive channel was that kind of modern, higher gain kind of sound. And I think a lot of players really wanted this to be like, basically like if you were to take a JTM 45 and modernize it like the DSL. And it wasn't quite that, for as cool as it was. And I remember thinking that. I actually even went to a Marshall show and talked to the rep about it. And I was like, well, the problem is that when you kick in the dynamics, it's too loud and they don't balance very well. And he told me that. He was like, well, the thing is it's not a two-channel amp. You're supposed to kind of run it one way or another. And so I think that sort of lost it some favor, but it's become a cult classic since. Also, it has KT66 tubes. I mean, it's just a really, really cool amplifier. Now, that being said, Marshall, in my opinion, is one of the companies that has really embraced this change in a great way where they've stayed true to who they are. And they've done that with a combination of smaller half-stack amplifiers, specifically the Studio series. Now, I do actually have an SV20. This is not a comparison video. I'm going to be doing a review of that soon. It's something that I also got through trade. The SV20 with the vertical 212 really captures the feel and the vibe of going out with a half-stack, but not, you know, not needing to lug around the insane weight, not needing to worry about the high volume or just the massive taking up of sonic space. Because that would be the downside of it, right? It's like, yeah, it's bigger and it's cool, but it's bigger. It takes up a lot, and a lot of that lower end thump, as cool as it is, it's something that's probably going to be filtered out by a soundboard a lot, because it is going to compete with the bass and the kick drum. And if you don't want bass that's just going to knock over your crowd, particularly in a smaller venue, then they got to do something to accommodate for that. But the mini stacks that Marshall has come out with, I think, is one of the best examples of a company adapting to modern times in a way that still embraces their heritage and what they're all about. And I'm going to talk about that all in another video. But for right now, I want to play through a bunch of tones. And again, keep in mind that these are reasonable volumes. They're probably low end of rehearsal volumes. Could it compete with a drummer? It could compete with a drummer that's not playing terribly loud. You know, you think about it like a big, powerful rock drummer who just goes nuts. Yeah, it wouldn't be quite that loud, but it would be, you know, reasonable for most drummers to kind of be heard where I am. Not quite gig volume, maybe. Now, this amp in particular also had one of the best cleans of any Marshall that I've ever heard. It had great reverb. It had a really cool feature where it had detail and body, basically like gain contour knobs or gain volume knobs. And essentially what they did was they mimicked the idea of blending the high treble and the normal inputs on a Marshall amp, where you can get a varying degree of either of them and really shape your gain structure that way. And it was incredibly suitable for a lot of classic tones. It also did some higher gain stuff really well, and just an awesome amplifier. I'd love to see Marshall maybe do a couple of tweaks and come out with the vintage modern again, sort of reissue that amp. It's not that old, but it would be cool to see that amp see the light of day once again. But let us know what you think in the comments. Do you think the age of the half stack is just gone? I mean, there is a practicality point to it. I haven't brought this one out to gig yet. I honestly don't know that I will, and it's not that I don't like it. I really like it. It's a really cool amplifier. It's more a matter of need and practicality, like how badly do I really want to have this amp on stage with me? Because it's no small feat lugging this thing around and kind of, you know, plugging it in comparatively to the smaller ones. Comparatively to, well, I can basically get the same sound with something in a smaller package. Even the SV20 half stack. Much easier to move around than the giant 412, and really delivers a lot of the same type of sounds that I would be wanting from these types of amps. But again, does that also mean that there's a certain age of rock and roll that we've just moved past? Have we just moved past the effort that it takes to create that image? Is part of this because a lot of the people who loved that image are getting older now? I mean, honestly, is that part of it? Are there kids nowadays? Are there, you know, guys in their teens and in their 20s who are seeing these bands with the stacks and who are still a little less tired than the rest of us, kind of saying like, yeah, man, I'm going to lug this thing out just because that's rock and roll and that's how you do it? Well, let's listen to some more tones from this amp. It sounds amazing clean. I know that a lot of people aren't going to be bringing out a big amp like this just to play clean, but man, it sounds amazing clean. I'm going to play it with a fuzz. We're going to play it with a Tru Fi pedals Sammy Fuzz. This is based on the old Sam Ash fuzz. Also going to play it clean with the Les Paul, hit it with a Fulltone OCD. Sounds amazing. You can hear how great it is. You can hear how big it is. But let me know what you think. Has rock and roll changed forever? Or are there still those of you out there who think that these are worthwhile and you'll bring them out to a gig? I'm Jack Fossett. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.